Some people want to be seen as professional. Some people do not want to be seen as professional. They think this is a dirty word. This quote is from a critical PR scholar talking about how professionalisation can be unpleasant. I was prompted to think of this and to suggest this Ignite when I came across a polemic, let us call it, a passionate polemic, earlier this month written by the Australian civil society advocate Vern Hughes in opendemocracy.net. He echoes some of these ideas. He talks about the managerial classes capturing much of the not-for-profit world, corporatising NGOs, and in doing so, detaching them from their founding purpose. So I wanted to briefly put out the sort of controversial question, is campaigning a profession? Is campaigning communications a profession? What are the pros and cons of professionalisation? Sorry, thanks. And what's the relationship, if any, between professionalisation and ethical behaviour? So there are loads of people doing campaign communications, lots of types of actors, from activists in Occupy to celebrities like Vivienne Westwood, people doing service delivery, working with and on behalf of beneficiaries, suited people in the SIVA at the top here, and I would suggest that all have varying degrees of commitment, all have varying degrees of specialist skills. Some are doing it for money. Not all would describe themselves as professional. Some of these people would actively not want to associate themselves with that term. I've flipped my slide too early. I think we could think about the difference between being a profession and being professional. Professional involves having experience, having commitment, having a bit of expertise, being competent, which presumably we all aspire to be or do, no matter whereabouts on the spectrum we might put ourselves. We could consider this question in terms of being paid or being amateur or unpaid. Some of these words are very loaded. So many successful and effective campaign communicators are unpaid. Volunteers, members of organisations, some of whom are here, Amnesty International, 38 degrees, being a Sisters Uncut activist. There are lots of unpaid people doing very successful work. So I would say that being paid for what you do it's not necessarily an indicator of if you have impact. In fact, if you are paid and have a career in this field, is there a risk of being co-opted? Let's think about what the criteria are for being a profession. Does that help us get any further with this question? We might decide that campaign communications has got some professional aspects, but is not a profession like medicine or law or accounting, where you have to have specific education, qualifications to do the job, and you can get chucked out by a professional body if you do something wrong. We're more of a kind of emerging or aspiring profession, I would say. So these 5 criteria that sociologists say define what a profession is kind of apply to us in some regard, but also throw up some problems. I'd say our kind of role in society, which is the first criterion of being a profession, absolutely tick. We've got that in the bag. Commitment to progressive social change, tick, move on. Second criterion, a clear entry route, well, there isn't one. There are some well-worn routes into this kind of work through internships, through volunteering, activism on the ground, lived experience, different kinds of relevant degrees or qualifications. No single shared compulsory route into this kind of work. So a big variety of approaches and understandings of how change happens. This is great and leads to a lot of diversity and interesting discussions. But if that debate about different approaches is not out in the open, it can be a bit problematic. It can be tense in those conversations. Body of knowledge, absolutely, there is one. But a lot of the really sort of deep academic underpinnings and research is locked away in very expensive academic journals, and sometimes all that's visible, best practice frameworks and models, are actually just the tip of the iceberg. And I think we lose something if we don't do a deep dive into the thinking behind where some of those frameworks have come from. Professional bodies. At the open space that I convened yesterday about pushing back against attacks on the closing of civil society space, someone asked, 2 seconds into the session, someone asked, where are our professional bodies on these attacks? There is no institute of campaigning. And that's a gap, which means that there isn't a sort of a representative, influential voice to defend and protect the sector. Codes of ethics. We had great insights yesterday from Amnesty into their very reflective ethical approach to working with and sharing and supporting the voices of beneficiaries and those they're working with. And there are various pieces of guidance on aspects of campaign communications work and guidance within single organisations, but there's nothing overarching. Now, granted, it would be really tough to reconcile the ethical approaches of organisations who believe in non-violent direct action or violent direct action, and then organisations who use only lobbying insider approaches. It's tough to reconcile radical approaches that want to confront and challenge entrenched corporate power or entrenched privileged Western views and values on things, to reconcile that with other approaches which want to challenge and perhaps break through some of those stereotypes. It's difficult, but it could be an advantage to have some kind of overarching starting point from which to work. I've got a slide about benefits of professionalisation. Legitimacy is important. It's good to share best practice. It can give you some status. On the other hand, the negatives are about limiting access to campaigning. How can we shut out people with lived experience or without, money to pay for education if we move constantly towards professionalisation? And does a reliance on frameworks and metrics stifle innovation? I'm not saying it does, I'm asking, do we think it might? And who decides what ethical practice looks like? Who is this Institute of Campaigning that we might bring in to tell us, you can accept funding from here, but not from there? You can't do nudge campaigns, they're manipulative. You must do NVDA, you can't do NVDA. How would you reconcile some of those ethical dilemmas? Do you rely on law? Do you rely on your individual morals? Do you rely on your organisational or other professional codes of conduct? Professionalisation might be a dirty word, but let's unpack it. Thank you. I'm done.
Well done, Michaela. Thank you very much. Good.